Okay. So when you're leading a team, and I know middle managers, that's what they do, isn't it? They lead people. When you come to that annual performance review, you usually think about what's going on with this person, and you adjust your approach depending on whether you're talking to someone who, let's face it, is a really good performer and you're really focused on how can I support you to continue to develop and grow, or you might have someone else in your team who's struggling in certain areas. So you adjust your approach depending on the situation. And we tend to do that because it's really in our face and it's a one-to-one interaction. But then so many other times, we don't take the same approach. So we might be dealing with a problem across functional areas within the organization. We might be implementing a change. And particularly when it comes to implementing a change, because it's been drummed into people, where's your change management plan? This is the approach you take if you're following the ProSci, you're a ProSci house organization. And the reality is that those sorts of things don't work in every situation, because not every situation is the same, just as like the people aren't the same. And if you're used to being a fixer and finding out what went wrong and how to prevent it from happening that way next time, you're probably someone who's used to going, well, this is what I think the problem is, and so this is what we're going to do to fix it. And you might be very used as a middle manager to develop a lot of different standard operating procedures, because you've learned on your way up that getting everyone to do it in a similar, consistent way makes life a lot easier. Well, that's what you thought. Because what often happens when we have all of those types of standard operating procedures, but the situations aren't all the same, is that you end up creating what is pretty much a bowl of spaghetti. And so when you pull one strand, something else unexpectedly shifts. And people end up getting so tied up in that sort of process that you're trying to manage that there's no room for them to flex and adapt. So what we suggest you do instead is think about what's a useful framework that you could use to help make sense of the situation that you're in. And so Dave Snowden and Mary Boone developed this really wonderful framework. Now, I'm going to spell it as well as say it, because like my last name, it's not so straightforward. So it's said Cynefin framework, but it's a Welsh word and it's spelled Cynefin. And it's a sense-making tool that you use to understand how to respond to different situations. So it helps you categorize what is this situation that I'm faced with and how could I actually respond to it. And so it's a really wonderful tool because it gives you some insights into understanding the nature of the problem and the approach that's going to set you up for success. So there's 5 domains in it, but if you think of it, it's a classic quadrant model. So you've got the Y. Which way does it go? The Y-axis, the X-axis. But anyway, so we start down in this bottom corner down here in my bottom right. That's where we tend to have the more simple problems. So they are your standard operating procedures. So things about, well, when you need to book a meeting, this is what you do. If you need to request a petty cash reimbursement or write a business case for funding and get it approved, these are the steps that you follow. So it's best practice, really clear cause and effect. If something goes wrong, well, it's like you skipped that step. That's why that didn't work. So simple is pretty clear and obvious. Then we go up a level into complicated. So if we think you've been asked to develop a marketing plan and you need to go out and do a whole heap of market research, you need expert knowledge. You might need to go out and do some specific assessments. Some other examples that you could use, or something that is a bit different. If you think of a high performance sports car and it's blowing smoke out the back, what do you do? So you or I might go, well, I'm going to ring the mechanic because I've got no idea what's wrong with my car. But the person who's got those specialist skills and expertise follows good practice. So they know that if I go and have a look at this and rule that out, then I can go and have a look at this next thing that it could be, and I can rule that out. And so it's a process of elimination. So it's expert knowledge assessment, and they can eventually find out why the problem is happening, and then they can work out how to fix it. And in those situations, when you fix it, it's, the thing that you're playing with doesn't actually change. Things get a little bit more challenging when we move from here across to up here, when we start moving into the complex domain. So we think about things like your organizational culture, or if you're trying to build a high performance team. People don't behave in exactly the way that you expect, do they? Because they are complex systems, and it's often only in hindsight why something went wrong or someone behaved in the way that they did. And so what often happens with complexity is the actual situation emerges from the interactions between the different things that are happening. Now, Mary Allbean, she's a researcher in that area of complexity, and she uses an example of what happens when you mix an egg, which is a separate thing, and oil. So when you mix them together, you get mayonnaise, don't you? If it works. If it doesn't work, you're never ever going to get the egg and the oil back the way that they were, are you? So once it's happened, and it's forever changed. And so if we think about things like the emergence of Airbnb, Uber, so the situation around those have changed forever. And so even if we think about the impact of COVID on the way in which people work, so the emergence of hybrid work, the prevalence of video conferencing, they're all things that have emerged from complexity.
Yes.
And when you're in a complex situation, you need a completely different approach. So you need to actually, what's called probe. So you've actually got to go and be curious and look at, what can I find out about this? And then you've got to bring all the bits of information that you're getting and the feelings and actually make sense of it. So then you can work out how to respond. So what's different about complexity is that you can't go and get the answer often. You may never ever know exactly why something happened. You could waste a lot of your time looking for a needle in a haystack when you'd actually be better off spending more of your time focusing on, well, what do I know? What don't I know? How could we respond to this? And so it's very much emergent practice. It's about doing some experiments, trying out different things and seeing what happens, and then adjusting what you're doing in response. Then you have down on this bottom corner, chaotic. So if we think of the coronavirus, it was called the novel coronavirus for a reason, because we'd never, ever experienced that before. And it's no different to a natural disaster or anything else that might come along, where you need to very quickly make sense of what's happening and try and get some order in place, and then start dealing with it in one of the other three domains. And the fifth domain is disordered. And that just means you've got no idea what type of situation you're working in, and you're trying to work it out. So I think the secret here is working out, what type of a situation am I dealing with? Am I dealing with something that's really simple, where I can apply best practice? Am I dealing with something that's complicated, where I need people with skills, but we can apply good practice to find the answer that we need? Or is this something that's actually complex, which means I need to throw that ProSci change management plan out the window, because it's not going to help me, because things are going to come up that are not in the plan, and I'm going to need to adjust as I go along to actually find my way through this. And if things are chaotic, it's about working out very quickly, how can I get some structure in place? So that's, think of a natural disaster and you put the business continuity plan into place. So once you work out what have we lost, then what do we need to quickly activate that we might have already prepared earlier, so that you're giving some people confidence about what needs to be done. So there's quite a lot in there, Sally, but I find the Cynefin framework is an extremely useful tool for people to actually make sense of the situation that they're in and then try an approach that's most likely to get you a good result.